I'm Melanie, a 32-year-old who spent most of her life walking the fine line between dutiful daughter and invisible doormat. Growing up, our household revolved around one star, my younger sister, Carly. She was the golden child, with my mother shining the brightest spotlight on her every achievement, no matter how small. Whether it was Carly's school play or a minor award at her dance recital, my mother, Deborah, would throw a celebration that rivaled a royal coronation. Meanwhile, my straight A's and endless hours spent working to help around the house barely warranted a pat on the back. Our modest home had always been a chaotic swirl of voices and expectations. My dad left when I was 10, and while I'd like to think he was a decent man, I don't have many memories of him. My mother, a staunch believer in keeping up appearances, turned her energy toward presenting our fractured family as perfect. "You girls are all I have," she'd say, though it often felt like Carly was all she needed. Despite my feelings of being sidelined, I was determined to forge my own path. I studied hard, worked part-time jobs, and eventually earned a degree in accounting. My life was far from glamorous, but it was mine. I landed a decent job at a local firm, saved diligently, and finally managed to rent my own tiny apartment last year. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and walls thin enough to hear my neighbors' nightly soap opera binges, but it was freedom. Then, life threw a curveball. 3 months ago, I was involved in a car accident on my way home from work. A distracted driver ran a red light, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed with a fractured leg and bruised ribs. Recovery was slow, but thankfully, my insurance came through with a settlement. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover my medical bills and make a significant dent in my student loans. It felt like a light at the end of a very dark tunnel. When I told my mom about the payout, I thought she'd be relieved. Instead, her eyes lit up with something I couldn't quite place, a mix of calculation and determination. At the time, I brushed it off, too distracted by the relief of financial security to dig deeper. But it didn't take long for her true intentions to surface. "You know, Carly has been saving up for that surgery," Mom mentioned casually one evening over dinner at her house. Surgery? At first, I thought something was wrong. My heart sank until Carly piped up, cheerfully explaining her plans for a life-changing cosmetic procedure, a nose job she'd been dreaming about since high school. "That's great," I said with a forced smile, wondering what this had to do with me. Mom didn't waste time connecting the dots. "Melanie, you could really help your sister out. Family sticks together, and you're in a position to make a difference." Her words hung in the air like a noxious cloud. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My payout, my hard-earned break from a lifetime of financial stress, was suddenly being framed as Carly's ticket to her perfect nose. It wasn't just an ask. It was an expectation. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of manipulation and guilt trips. Every phone call, every family dinner was laced with subtle and sometimes not so subtle hints about my duty to help Carly. "She's been through so much," Mom would say, conveniently ignoring my struggles. Carly played along perfectly, sighing dramatically about her lack of confidence and how the surgery would change her life. It was exhausting. I had spent years bending over backward to meet my family's expectations, always putting myself last. This time, though, something inside me rebelled. The thought of sacrificing my financial stability for Carly's vanity felt like a final straw I couldn't carry. But I knew better than to outright refuse, not yet. Mom didn't take no lightly, and Carly had a knack for turning my quiet resistance into a dramatic betrayal. If I was going to stand my ground, I'd have to do it carefully. So I played along. I nodded, hummed sympathetically, and let them believe I was considering their outrageous request. Meanwhile, I was quietly preparing for a different kind of confrontation, one that would change everything. It started with a phone call. I had just finished a long day of balancing accounts at work, and all I wanted was to sink into my couch with a cup of tea. But as soon as I saw Mom flash across my screen, I knew my evening wasn't going to be peaceful. "Hi, Mom," I answered, forcing some cheer into my voice. "Melanie, darling," she began, her tone oozing sweetness that immediately put me on guard. "Carly and I were talking, and we think it's time we finalized everything for her surgery. The doctor says she can get a slot next month, but we need to pay the deposit soon." I froze, my hand tightening around the phone. So this was it, the moment she stopped hinting and outright demanded. "Mom, I never said I was paying for her surgery," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Melanie," she sighed, the saccharine tone vanishing, replaced by exasperation. "I'm not asking for all of it, just the deposit. That's only a fraction of what you got from the insurance. It's not like you're using it for anything urgent." Her words hit me like a slap. Not urgent? Clearing my student loans, which had weighed on me for years, wasn't urgent? Building a safety net after months of being out of work due to my accident wasn't urgent? "I have plans for that money," I said firmly, though my stomach churned at the confrontation. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her shifting gears. "Melanie, you know how much Carly's struggled with her self-esteem. This surgery could change her life. And isn't family supposed to help each other? I mean, I did so much for you girls after your father left. Don't I deserve some consideration?" Guilt. She was wielding it like a weapon, and I hated how effective it was. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Carly's voice chimed in from the background. "Mel, come on. I'd do it for you if the roles were reversed. It's not like you're going to miss the money once your debts are paid off. Don't be selfish." Selfish? That word stung more than it should have. It was the go-to accusation in my family whenever I dared to prioritize myself. The unfairness of it burned, but I couldn't let them see how deeply it cut. "I'll think about it," I finally said, needing an escape from the conversation. "Good," Mom said, her voice brightening instantly. "We'll come by tomorrow to go over the payment details." Before I could protest, she hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. They weren't even giving me a choice. They were taking my consideration as a guarantee. The next day, Mom and Carly showed up at my apartment, armed with brochures and paperwork from the clinic. Carly's enthusiasm was in full swing as she flipped through glossy pages of testimonials and before and after photos. Mom sat beside her, nodding in approval, as if they were planning a family vacation. "Look at this one," Carly said, shoving a picture of a model-like woman in my face. "Dr. Bennett says he can give me a profile just like hers. Isn't it amazing?" I gritted my teeth. "It's impressive, but I still haven't decided." Mom's expression hardened. "What's there to decide, Melanie? You've got the money, and Carly needs this. Do you want her to go on feeling like she's not good enough?" "I've got debts, Mom," I said, my voice cracking under the strain. "I've got responsibilities." "And so does Carly," Mom shot back. "She has her future ahead of her. You're her big sister. It's your job to support her." I wanted to scream. My job? When had it ever been Carly's job to support me? When I was working double shifts to keep a roof over my head? When I was recovering from my accident alone because Mom was too busy driving Carly to her endless appointments? But I swallowed the words. Arguing wouldn't change their minds. Instead, I plastered on a neutral expression and nodded along, even as fury bubbled inside me. They left satisfied, convinced I'd given in. But as I closed the door behind them, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't let them take this from me. This time, I wasn't going to cave. In the days that followed, it felt like I was the main attraction in a circus, with Mom and Carly taking turns as the relentless ringmasters. Every interaction was another performance designed to coerce, guilt, or manipulate me into handing over the money. And if their direct attempts didn't work, they had no problem bringing in backup. Aunt Cheryl called me the next morning, her voice syrupy sweet. "Melanie, sweetheart, your mom told me about Carly's surgery. Such a wonderful opportunity for her. You know, you've always been so dependable. Such a good daughter. I know you'll do the right thing." I clenched my phone tightly, feeling the familiar weight of expectation pressing down on me. "Aunt Cheryl, I have my own financial obligations to think about." "Oh, I'm sure you'll figure it out," she replied breezily, as though my life was a minor inconvenience compared to Carly's nose job. "Just think how happy your mom will be." The calls didn't stop there. Uncle Steve weighed in, and even my cousin Jenna, who I hadn't spoken to in years, texted me out of the blue to encourage me to support the family. It was as if Mom had activated some sort of familial guilt-tripping hotline, and everyone was lining up to take a shot. Then came the public confrontations. Mom orchestrated a dinner at her house, inviting extended family under the pretense of a casual get-together. I should have known better than to walk into the lion's den, but part of me hoped she wouldn't stoop so low. I was wrong. The evening started innocently enough, with Mom fussing over the appetizers and Carly lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. But as soon as we sat down for dinner, the ambush began. "So, Melanie," Mom began, her tone casual but her eyes sharp, "have you made any decisions about Carly's surgery?" I froze, my fork hovering midair. All eyes turned to me, the unspoken pressure suffocating. "I'm still thinking about it," I said carefully, trying to deflect. "Well, what's there to think about?" Carly chimed in, her voice dripping with faux innocence. "You've got the money, and it's not like you're using it for anything important." The words stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. "It's important to me," I replied firmly. Uncle Steve, seated across from me, shook his head. "Come on, Mel, you're the big sister. Isn't it your job to help out when you can?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Mom cut me off. "Exactly. We've all made sacrifices for this family, Melanie. Don't you think it's time you stepped up?" The absurdity of her statement nearly made me laugh. Stepped up? I had been stepping up my entire life, putting my needs last so they could live comfortably. I had worked through college, taken care of myself after my accident, and never once asked for their help. But now, when I needed this money to finally breathe, I was being painted as selfish. "I have stepped up," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. "More times than I can count. But this is my money, and I get to decide how to use it." The room fell into an awkward silence, tension crackling like static. Then Carly leaned back in her chair with a dramatic sigh. "It's not like I'm asking for a mansion, Melanie. I just want to feel good about myself for once. Is that really so much to ask?" The tears in her eyes were calculated, perfectly timed to make me look like the villain. I bit the inside of my cheek, refusing to let them see me crack. The days after that dinner were a whirlwind of petty tactics. Carly posted a series of passive-aggressive updates on social media, vague enough to avoid outright naming me, but pointed enough that everyone knew who she was talking about. "Some people are so selfish," one post read, paired with a stock photo of a crying woman. Another was more direct. "Family is supposed to support you, not hold you back." My phone buzzed constantly with texts from mutual friends, all of them asking what was going on. I felt trapped, cornered by a web of manipulation that Mom and Carly had expertly spun around me. But instead of breaking, I grew more determined. One evening, I sat down with my laptop and a glass of wine, ready to put my plan into motion. I reviewed my debts, calculating how far the insurance payout would take me. It wouldn't erase everything, but it would wipe out the most pressing loans and leave me with a small cushion for emergencies. The next day, I went to the bank and made the payments one by one. With each transaction, a weight lifted from my shoulders. By the time I walked out, I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. The money was gone, used for what it was meant for, securing my future. When Mom called later that week, I felt an odd sense of calm as I picked up the phone. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "Melanie, we need to finalize the payment for Carly's surgery. I talked to Dr. Bennett's office, and they need the deposit by Friday." I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "Mom, the money is gone." There was a pause, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "I used it to pay off my debts," I said simply, my heart pounding but my voice unwavering. The silence on the other end was deafening, and for a moment I thought she might have hung up. But then her voice returned, laced with fury. How could you do this to your family? To your sister? Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, I replied, my tone calm but firm. I've secured my future, Mom. Something I should have done a long time ago. Her tirade continued, but I tuned it out, letting the words wash over me without leaving a mark. For the first time in years, I felt in control. The storm wasn't over, but I was no longer afraid of it. Mom showed up at my apartment 2 days later, storming through the door as soon as I opened it. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. Carly was right behind her, arms crossed and face twisted into a theatrical display of betrayal. How could you be so selfish, Melanie? Mom demanded, her voice trembling with anger. She dropped her purse onto my kitchen table with a thud and pointed an accusatory finger at me. Your sister needed you, and you just turned your back on her. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, crossing my arms. I didn't turn my back on anyone. I used the money to pay off my debts. I told you this was my decision. Carly stepped forward, her tone sharp and cutting. You know what, Mel? I actually thought you'd come through for me, but clearly I was stupid to believe you'd ever care about anyone but yourself. I took a deep breath, determined not to let their words rattle me. This isn't about caring, Carly. It's about priorities. I've spent my entire life putting myself last, and for once, I'm not going to do that anymore. Mom scoffed, shaking her head as if I were speaking a foreign language. You're being ridiculous. We're family. Family sacrifices for each other. I gave up so much to raise you girls, and this is how you repay me? That's exactly the problem, Mom, I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. You've always framed everything you've done as some monumental sacrifice, but you've never once acknowledged the sacrifices I've made. I've been the responsible one, the dependable one, and what has that gotten me? Nothing but guilt trips and being taken for granted. Carly rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go. Poor, poor Melanie. Always the victim. Her dismissiveness hit a nerve, and something inside me snapped. Do you even hear yourself, Carly? You've had everything handed to you on a silver platter, while I've had to scrape and claw for every little thing I've achieved. And now you think you're entitled to my money because you want a nose job? Do you have any idea how ridiculous that sounds? Carly's face flushed with indignation, and she opened her mouth to retort, but Mom cut in, her voice shrill and desperate. It's not ridiculous. Carly's surgery is about her self-esteem, about her future. You don't understand because you've always been fine with being mediocre. The words stung, but instead of crumbling, I let the anger surge through me, steadying my resolve. I stepped closer, looking Mom directly in the eye. You're right. I don't understand. I don't understand how you can look at me, your daughter, and dismiss everything I've accomplished as mediocrity. I don't understand how you can demand that I sacrifice my stability for something as superficial as a cosmetic surgery. But you know what, Mom? I don't need to understand, because I'm done. Mom's face contorted in disbelief. Done? What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done being your scapegoat, I said, my voice calm but unyielding. I'm done being the one you guilt and manipulate every time you need something. You want to help Carly? Then help her. But leave me out of it. Carly's eyes narrowed, and she stepped forward, her voice dripping with venom. You think you're so high and mighty because you paid off some bills? You're pathetic, Melanie. You're just jealous because no one ever cared about you the way they care about me. I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the tense silence. You're right, Carly. No one did care about me the way they care about you. And you know what? That used to hurt. But now, I'm glad, because I don't need anyone's approval anymore, least of all yours. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the sound of Carly's indignant huff and Mom's sputtering attempts to respond. Finally, Mom grabbed her purse, her movements jerky with frustration. This isn't over, Melanie, she said, her voice low and menacing. You'll regret this. I opened the door wide, gesturing for them to leave. No, Mom, I won't, because for the first time in my life, I'm doing what's best for me. They stormed out, slamming the door behind them. The silence that filled the apartment was deafening, but it wasn't oppressive. It was liberating. I sank onto the couch, my heart still pounding, but my chest feeling lighter than it had in years. The fallout was swift and predictable. Mom called every relative she could think of, spinning the story to paint me as the villain. I received countless texts and voicemails, some filled with anger, others with disappointment, but I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't need to. I had finally drawn a line, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to stand behind it. The days following their departure were strangely quiet. For years, I had been conditioned to brace myself for the next demand, the next crisis that Mom and Carly would drop at my feet, but now, there was nothing. The phone calls and guilt-laden messages slowed, and the texts from extended family stopped after I ignored enough of them. It felt like stepping into sunlight after years of being stuck in the shadows. At work, my focus improved. Without the weight of my family's constant expectations hanging over me, I started tackling projects with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My boss even pulled me aside to compliment my recent performance. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," she said with a smile. It was a small thing, but it reminded me that I was more than just a disappointment in someone else's narrative. I was capable, competent, and worthy of acknowledgement. Mom, of course, wasn't ready to let go completely. A week later, she showed up at my door unannounced, her demeanor subdued, but her intentions clear. She sat stiffly on the edge of my couch, her eyes scanning my apartment like she was looking for weaknesses to exploit. "Melanie," she began, her voice softer than I was used to, "I've been thinking about what you said." I folded my arms, wary but curious. "And?" She sighed, fiddling with the strap of her purse. "You're right. You've always worked hard, and I haven't given you the credit you deserve. I just..." Her voice wavered, and for a moment, she looked almost vulnerable. "I wanted things to be easier for Carly. She's not as strong as you." The words should have softened me, but they only cemented my resolve. "Mom, Carly is strong enough to get what she wants. She always has been. What she's not used to is hearing no. And that's not my fault." Mom flinched, her hands clenching around her purse strap. "I didn't mean to make you feel like you weren't important. I thought you'd understand." "I do understand," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "You've spent years making Carly's life easier, but it came at my expense. I can't keep being the one you turn to when you need something. I'm done sacrificing myself for her or for you." Mom's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting away from mine. "I see." She stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt. "Well, I hope you're happy, Melanie. You've made your point." "I am happy," I said simply, "and I'm finally living my life for me." She left without another word, and this time I didn't feel the familiar pang of guilt that usually followed our confrontations. Instead, I felt a sense of finality, not the kind that comes with bridges burned, but the kind that comes with boundaries firmly drawn. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself rediscovering the things I loved. I picked up painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I started going to a yoga class on Saturdays, where I met people who didn't know anything about my family drama and didn't care. And most importantly, I began to build a future for myself, one free from the weight of my family's endless demands. I heard through the grapevine that Carly had found another way to pay for her surgery. She started a crowdfunding campaign, complete with a tearful video about how much the procedure meant to her. The video made its rounds on social media, garnering sympathy and donations from people who didn't know the whole story. It worked, of course. Carly got her surgery, and she got to play the victim, a role she was born to perfect. But I didn't feel angry or bitter. For the first time, I felt free. Carly's life was her responsibility now, and so was mine. And as I sat in my tiny apartment one evening, sipping tea and sketching out plans for my next project, I realized that freedom was worth more than anything money could buy. A year later, I stood in my new office, sunlight streaming through the wide windows. The promotion had come after months of hard work and focus and acknowledgement of my talent and determination. My coworkers had thrown me a small celebration, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Mom and Carly were still distant. We exchanged polite texts on birthdays and holidays, but the once constant demands had disappeared. Carly posted photos of her new nose on social media, still basking in the attention. She seemed content in her world, and I was finally content in mine. One quiet evening, as I sipped tea and looked out over the city, my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "I saw your work announcement. Congratulations, Melanie. I'm proud of you." I smiled but didn't respond immediately. Instead, I set my phone aside, savoring the peace I'd fought so hard to earn. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt, but from my side, the view was spectacular.